Jake Thompson leaned back in his patio chair, a cold beer in one hand and a pair of grill tongs in the other. The smell of sizzling steaks filled the air as the sun cast a golden glow over his backyard. It was a perfect Sunday. His best friend, Ethan, was lounging on a lawn chair, laughing at some ridiculous story Mrs. Collins, his feisty, retired neighbor, was telling. Even Max, his golden retriever, was having a blast, wagging his tail as he chased a butterfly. Life was good, until it wasn't. Just as Jake flipped a juicy ribeye, a sharp voice cut through the cheerful hum of conversation. "Sir, I need you to shut this down immediately." Jake turned to find a middle-aged man with a cheap clipboard and an official-looking HOA vest standing at the entrance to his yard. He had the type of face that looked like it hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration. "Excuse me?" Jake raised an eyebrow, still holding the tongs. "You are in violation of multiple HOA policies," the man declared, adjusting his badge like he was some kind of law enforcement officer. "Outdoor cooking is not permitted unless it adheres to strict guidelines, and I don't see a permit for this gathering. Also, open flames must be at least 15 feet away from a fence. This is non-compliant." Ethan stifled a laugh. Mrs. Collins, who had lived in the neighborhood long before any HOA existed, squinted at the man and took a slow sip of her iced tea. "That's cute," Jake said, setting down his beer. "Only problem is, I'm not part of the HOA. The man's expression didn't change. "All properties in this subdivision fall under HOA jurisdiction. Not mine," Jake replied with a smirk. "I checked when I bought the place. My house was here before the HOA form, and I never signed up." Gregson, as his name tag read, stiffened. His beady eyes flickered between Jake and the grill, as if debating whether he should issue a fine or just flip a steak out of spite. "All homes in this area are expected to uphold community standards," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Your activities are disruptive. There are rules, and they apply to everyone." Jake chuckled. "I think you mean they apply to HOA members." Again, not me. Gregson's jaw twitched. He had clearly expected Jake to roll over and apologize. Instead, he was being challenged in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. Mrs. Collins, who had been watching with the amusement of someone who had lived through multiple wars, finally chimed in. "Oh, Greggy, this is the third time you've tried to pull this nonsense. Last time, it was because Martin's front door was too red. The time before that, you harassed the Williamses about their garden gnome." She shook her head. "Honestly, do you even have real hobbies?" Gregson ignored her. "You will receive a fine for this violation." He yanked out a pre-written ticket from his clipboard and scribbled something. Jake leaned over and read it aloud. "Unauthorized outdoor cooking. First offense. $500. He let out a short laugh. "You can take this and—" Ethan coughed loudly, cutting him off before he could finish that sentence. Jake took a deep breath and instead tore the ticket in half, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. "Like I said, I'm not in the HOA. You can't find me. Now, if you'll excuse me, my steaks are almost done." Gregson's face turned a lovely shade of beet red. "You're making a mistake." Jake gave him a slow grin. "That's funny. I was about to say the same thing to you." For a moment, it looked like Gregson might lunge for the grill, but then he exhaled sharply and stormed off. "You'll be hearing from the HOA board," he shouted over his shoulder. Jake raised his beer. "Looking forward to it." Ethan let out a long whistle. "Man, that guy has a stick so far up his—" "Don't finish that sentence," Mrs. Collins said, though she was grinning. Jake thought that was the end of it. The HOA couldn't find him, and Gregson would eventually accept defeat. But later that night, as he was cleaning up, his phone rang. It was Martin, his other neighbor, sounding serious. "Hey, Jake, I just wanted to warn you," Martin said. "Gregson isn't going to let this go. The HOA's been pulling shady stuff for months now. You're not the first person they've tried to find when they had no right to." Jake frowned. "And what happened to those people?" Martin hesitated. "Most of them moved out. They got sick of the harassment. A chill ran down Jake's spine. He had no plans to move. This was his home. But if Martin was right, this wasn't just about a barbecue. This was something bigger. Jake hung up and glanced out his window. Across the street, Gregson was standing in front of his car, talking to someone on the phone. Jake had a feeling this was just the beginning. Here's the next section of your story, continuing the escalation in an engaging, humorous, and suspenseful way. Jake woke up the next morning feeling like he had a hangover, except he hadn't been drinking much the night before. Maybe it was a lingering annoyance from dealing with Gregson, or maybe it was Martin's warning about the HOA's shady tactics. Either way, he wasn't in the mood for nonsense. But nonsense found him anyway. When he stepped outside to grab the newspaper, his eyes immediately landed on a large envelope taped to his mailbox. The words "Urgent Notice" were stamped across the front in bold red letters. With a sinking feeling, Jake ripped it open. "Dear homeowner, you've been found in violation of HOA Regulation 14B, unauthorized use of outdoor cooking equipment. A fine of $1,000 has been issued. Failure to pay will result in legal action and potential property liens. Compliance is expected immediately." Jake laughed loudly. The stupidity of it all was almost impressive. Not only had Gregson doubled the fake fine overnight, but now they were threatening legal action over a barbecue against someone who wasn't even in their HOA. Jake marched straight to his laptop and did a quick check on the HOA's official website. His stomach twisted when he saw something new. His house had been mysteriously added to the HOA's member list. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. They were trying to pull some underhanded scheme to force him into their jurisdiction. His blood boiled as he picked up his phone and dialed the HOA office. A robotic voice greeted him, followed by a series of hold music that sounded like it was composed by someone who hated happiness. Finally, someone picked up. "This is Linda with the Oak Ridge Community HOA. How may I assist you today?" "Yeah. Hi. I need to speak to someone about an incorrect HOA fine I just received. Can I have your name and address?" "Jake Thompson, 142 Maple Drive." There was a long pause. Then Linda's voice returned, suddenly more clipped. "Sir, we have your file here. You were recently added to our community guidelines." "That's interesting," Jake interrupted, "because I never signed any agreement. My property is legally exempt from your HOA, and yet, somehow, I woke up today and found out you've magically enrolled me." Linda cleared her throat. "All properties in Oak Ridge are subject to HOA oversight. If you believe there has been an error, you are welcome to submit a formal dispute through." Jake cut her off again. "I don't need to submit a dispute for something that was never legal in the first place. You and I both know what you're doing. Tell Gregson and your board to back off." Silence. Then, in a sickly sweet voice, Linda said, "I'm afraid you'll have to take that up with the HOA president, Karen Whitmore." Jake clenched his jaw. "Fine. Give me her number." "Oh, she doesn't take direct calls." Of course, she didn't. Before he could respond, Linda added, "Have a great day, sir." Then the line clicked dead. Jake exhaled sharply and turned back toward his house. That's when he noticed something strange. Asterisk, asterisk, a tow truck parked at the edge of his driveway. Asterisk, asterisk. A man in a jumpsuit was standing next to it, clipboard in hand. "Can I help you?" Jake called. The man barely looked up. "Vehicle reported for unauthorized parking." "Just doing my job, sir." Jake stared at him. "You're towing my car from my own driveway." "That's what the paperwork says," the man muttered. Jake marched over, snatched the clipboard from his hands, and skimmed the report. The request had been filed by the HOA under reason. It simply said, "Violation of community standards." That was it. No law. No ordinance. Just a vague excuse. "You're not towing my car," Jake said firmly, shoving the clipboard back at the guy. The man frowned. "Look, I just do what I'm told. If you got a problem, take it up with the HOA." "Oh, He planned to, but before he could say another word, the distinct sound of a camera shutter clicked behind him. Mrs. Collins, standing on her porch, had her phone raised. "Don't mind me," she said cheerfully. "Just making sure we have proof when you take these crooks to court." The tow truck driver paled. "Court?" Jake smirked. "Oh, yeah, definitely illegal. How about you call your boss and tell him the HOA's scamming homeowners?" The guy hesitated, then wordlessly got into his truck and drove off. Mrs. Collins gave Jake a satisfied nod. "You've officially made the HOA's hit list, kiddo. What's your next move?" Jake didn't have to think about it. "I'm going to find out what they're up to." That night, Ethan came over and they formulated a plan. If the HOA was illegally adding people to their jurisdiction, there had to be proof. Ethan, ever the tech-savvy genius, had an idea. "I'll go to the next HOA meeting and pretend I'm thinking of buying a house here," Ethan said. "You know, ask about their rules and how they enforce them." Jake nodded. "And I'll dig into their records. If they've been doing this to other homeowners, someone's bound to have receipts." It didn't take long for the first bombshell to drop. That same evening, Ethan messaged him. "Ethan asterisk dude, we were right. HOA is straight up extorting people." Jake asterisk, "What did you find?" Ethan asterisk, "They're secretly finding people who aren't in the HOA, then adding their homes to the system as delinquent members." Jake asterisk, "That's illegal." Ethan asterisk, "Oh, it gets better. Gregson and HOA President Karen are skimming money from the legal funds. Homeowners are paying fake fees, but the money isn't going toward community projects." Jake asterisk, "So where's it going?" Ethan asterisk, "Their personal bank accounts." Jake's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about an annoying fine. The HOA was running a full-blown fraud operation. Jake exhaled. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Time to bring these crooks down. Here's the final section of your story, bringing it to an epic and satisfying conclusion." Jake didn't waste any time. If Ethan's intel was right, the HOA wasn't just harassing homeowners for fun. They were running a full-fledged extortion racket, and if they thought he was going to roll over, they had another thing coming. The next HOA meeting was 2 days away. That was his shot. But he wasn't going in alone. Jake called in some favors. First, he reached out to a local investigative journalist, Danielle Pierce, who had a reputation for exposing corruption. When he told her about the fake fines, the illegal property enrollments, and the missing funds, she practically begged to come along, with a hidden camera. Next, he contacted a city council member, Ryan Gallagher, who had been vocal about cracking down on rogue HOAs. Gallagher agreed to attend under the guise of a community check-in. If the HOA was violating any city ordinances, he'd know. Lastly, he made sure Ethan would be there, playing his part as the potential homebuyer, looking for answers. By the time the night of the meeting rolled around, Jake was more than ready. He walked into the HOA clubhouse with his head high, Ethan at his side, and Danielle discreetly recording. Gregson was standing near the front, smug as ever, while Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, sat at the head of the table, looking like a discount Bond villain in a pastel blazer. Well, Gregson sneered. Look who finally decided to comply. Jake smirked. "Oh, I'm definitely here to discuss compliance." The room was packed with HOA members and unsuspecting homeowners who had no idea what was about to hit them. Ethan started things off by playing dumb. "So," he said, raising a hand, "I was thinking about moving here, but I heard some stuff about the HOA. Like, how do you guys enforce rules?" Karen gave her best fake smile. "We have a structured fine system in place to ensure community standards are upheld." Danielle, still recording, jumped in. "And those fines, do they only apply to actual HOA members?" Gregson's eyes flickered. "Well, the community as a whole benefits when all homeowners follow the rules." Jake folded his arms. "That's not what she asked. Can you fine non-HOA members?" Karen's smile twitched. "All homeowners are expected to contribute." "That's not an answer." The room grew quiet. Some of the other homeowners started exchanging confused glances. Ryan Gallagher, the city council member, cleared his throat. I'd like to remind everyone that HOAs cannot legally fine non-members unless they have signed an agreement. If that's happening, it's a violation of homeowner rights. Gregson went pale. Karen forced another tight smile. We have legal counsel that ensures our policies align with community best practices. Danielle leaned forward. Then you wouldn't mind explaining the fake fines issued to non-members? A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Jake took out his phone and pulled up his HOA fine. The one demanding $1,000 for BBQ. Here's one example. Sent to me. A homeowner who's not even in your HOA, you forged my enrollment. Gregson opened his mouth, but Jake wasn't finished. And then there's the missing money, Ethan. You want to tell them what you found? Ethan grinned. Oh, yeah. Happy to. We dug into the HOA's finances. Turns out, thousands of dollars in homeowner fines weren't going to community projects at all. He turned his laptop around, displaying a spreadsheet of transactions. They were being transferred directly into Karen and Gregson's personal bank accounts. A collective gasp filled the room. Karen shot out of her chair. That is a gross misinterpretation of financial procedures, she shrieked. Who gave you access to that information? Ethan grinned. That would be your former HOA treasurer, who quit last month after realizing what you were doing. Karen's hands trembled as she turned to Gregson, who looked like he was seconds away from throwing up. Ryan Gallagher stood up. I think I've heard enough. Based on what's been presented, it's clear this HOA has been operating illegally, extorting non-members, forging property enrollments, and committing financial fraud. Danielle set her phone on the table. And just so we're clear, all of this has been recorded. I'll be running a full expose on HOA corruption in tomorrow's news. Karen lunged for the phone, but before she could reach it, the door slammed open. 2 uniformed police officers strode in, their expressions grim. Karen Whitmore and Gregson Matthews. One of them announced, "You're under arrest for fraud, harassment, and illegal financial activity." Chaos erupted. Karen screamed about conspiracy theories as the officers cuffed her. Gregson looked like he was about to faint. Homeowners yelled in outrage, realizing they'd been scammed for years. Jake, standing amid the madness, just smiled. Justice was served. In the days that followed, the HOA crumbled without Karen and Gregson running their scheme. The board voted to dissolve itself. All fraudulent fines were voided, and illegally obtained funds were returned to homeowners. Jake, meanwhile, celebrated the only way he knew how. That weekend, he hosted the biggest barbecue the neighborhood had ever seen. This time, no one tried to stop him. Danielle's article went viral, cementing him as a local legend. Ethan couldn't stop bragging about his hacking skills. Even Ryan Gallagher showed up for a steak, casually mentioning that HOA reform was now a major topic in City Hall. But the best part? A few months later, Gregson's house was foreclosed. Turns out, he'd been funding his own mortgage with HOA money. And in a delicious twist of fate, guess who bought it? Jake's lawyer. The final scene? Jake, standing in his backyard, flipping burgers while looking at Gregson's old house, his new neighbor. Asterisk, asterisk, his lawyer. Grinning ear to ear, asterisk, asterisk. No more HOA. No more harassment. Just peace, grilling, and freedom. As Mrs. Collins raised her lemonade in a toast, she summed it up perfectly. Justice tastes almost as good as these ribs.